Hello and welcome to the Whirly Bloke channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing the new Crusader GT 2017 mini quad from Diatone. I think it's fair to say I'm pretty excited about the new 2017 GT2 arriving. Ever since I got a sniff of a new version a couple of months ago, I've been trying to get my hands on one for review. And finally, I've managed to source one in the UK and it's just been delivered. And if you've watched my other videos on the channel, you'll know what a massive fan I am of the original. Well, although I build loads of quads, I'm fascinated how Diatone managed to deliver such a well-designed, ready-to-fly mini quad with such a high build quality. The original GT2 wasn't perfect by any means. There were some niggly issues and initial quality control problems. The OSD on my first GT2 I got about 9 months ago packed up on the second ever flight, and the frame seriously broke. Well, it delaminated in a not particularly heavy crash, but that was all sorted, and I always have the GT2 with me when I'm flying. It's not a full race quad or freestyle quad, but it's pretty close, and it'll be interesting to see if Diatone have improved on the original. There's a load of reviews of the 2017 model out there at the moment, so rather than just repeat what they're saying, I'm going to try and compare it with the original, and I know this really well, and see whether it's worth getting the new model if you've already got the previous one. And obviously I'll cover how well this performs. I'll make this a two-parter, and I'll do a review and some flight footage for part 1 and do a full setup and tweaks and changes in part 2. So let's get on and have a look. I'm not normally a fan of unboxing, but I have to say Diatone do a superb job, and other manufacturers could take a lesson from this. So we've got some props, that looks like an OSD cable, some stickers, a warning message about tightening the bolts on the motors, and silicate gel. So here we go. I'll open that in a second, but if you look here, I mean, just like on the original version, everything is beautifully packaged and labelled. You get so many extras of everything you need. There's a buzzer in there. We got VTX antenna. Looks like some spare cables and straps, but we'll have a look at that in a sec. So here we go. Just warnings about powering up the quad without an antenna. Let's take a look. Now let's get this open first. So, oh, that's lovely. So when I ordered this, I went for the stretch version, which is really designed for racing, and I wanted to get blue, but they didn't have any in stock. Although it looks the same as the original GT2, there's quite a few differences. So it's still got the same mixture of carbon fibre risers, which forms like a little hood on the top here, a mount for your session, and going to be interesting to see whether that fits. Yeah, that fits great, but this still has the problem, it's not really at the right angle for getting the props out of the shot, and hopefully let's have a quick look. Yeah, these are the mounts that I use, and you've seen these before if you've subscribed to my channel. This is one, an unfinished one. So let's see, does that fit on there? Perfect. I know it's an ugly colour, but we'll get a red one and have a look in a second. Yep, that all looks good. That's great. So what have they done that's different? Okay, they've got these aluminium mounts over the ESCs. Not quite sure that has a real benefit. The motors are obviously different. We've got a different arrangement of holding the top plate on here, which all looks good. It's got this quite clever way of doing the soft mount on the motor and the bolts, which is quite similar to the scheme that we've got on the original version. The way that this is mounted is different. Instead of having bolts coming through from the top, they're actually coming through from the bottom, and obviously it's a slightly, as you can see here, these bolts actually run up into the mounts, and then there's four additional mounting holes to hold the strap on. The whole point of this strap, which is very different from most other mini quads, is that you don't have to put your lipo strap between the frame and whatever board you've got on the bottom here. This actually rises off, and this works in a similar way. Slightly better in that the problem I found with this is that when you mount your battery there, you need some cushioning because it dents the lipo quite badly. And this looks like it's longer. I know it's slightly stretched because it's a stretch frame, but yeah, that looks good. I'm keen to see what's in under here. I know that we've got a different flight controller. It's soft mounted, that's great. I'm not such a fan of using cable ties like this to hold the ESCs in place, and these mounts, these covers for the ESCs are there to stop props smashing into the top of them. I've never actually had that as an issue. The motors look nice. The only shame of it is that the motors are, I know this is a trivial thing, but one of the obvious things that comes out of Diatone is whoever has overall responsibility for the design of this sees it through. And if you look at an original GT2, I know this is slightly modified because it's got these covers on here to protect the frame and the soft motor mounts, but it's all keyed together quite nicely. So the motors are silver and black, so it doesn't matter what accessories go on here, it will always match. These new motors on here, they come in blue, so red was the only option I had available to me, so I had to order red, even though I wanted blue or silver. It wasn't available. Still a bit of an issue here. That's not great. You can see here that the XT60 is, although it's soldered onto that's the flight controller board at the top there. There's no restraint on that, so if you tug that, you're going to pull the pads off the board probably. But it still looks very nicely put together, and I can't resist having a look at how these motor mounts work. This is a very similar mechanism to the one I reviewed a few weeks ago. If you look here, this is the original frame protector that I designed, which has been turned upside down and used to soft mount the motor from the frame, which is great. But the problem with that is the bolts are still in contact with the frame underneath, and this second soft mount on the bottom with the washers on isolates the bolts from the frame, which is similar to what's going on here, but this looks very nicely engineered. So we've got a plate. Let's see, do this without obscuring what's going on too much. This is a bit mad taking something apart when it's just turned up. So we've got a bolt and a washer. We've got, oh, I see how this works. Yep, clever. So basically what we've got is a mount that is isolated from the frame. These holes in the frame are larger, so you've got this isn't 3D printed, this is like a silicon mold insulator or isolator that fits in the holes and isolates everything from the frame, and then you've got another what looks like silicon isolator on top. So the motors, the bolts, motors and bolts are completely isolated. Similar idea to this, but these are obviously aftermarket. These work very well. These work great. They're really good. So let's put that back together. There doesn't seem to be any thread lock holding these on, hence the warning that came in here about torquing them down to 0.65 to 0.67 Newton meters. Well, I don't think many of us have actually got those micro torque wrenches. The reason being, they are incredibly expensive. You can spend a couple of £100 on one of those. So we just nip this up. Basically till it feels about right, I guess. Very nice. It's a nice touch. All this looks exactly so subtly different. Okay, well, let's break this down and go through the specs and do a comparison with the original GT2. As we can see, yeah, you can definitely see the stretch on that. It feels a little bit heavier actually, even though it's got a receiver and it's got these motor protectors on. Okay, let's go through the specs in a bit more detail. So something I didn't quite cover in details as I was opening the box is exactly like the original GT2, and I did mention this briefly. You get at least 2 of every cable you're going to need, and the way that they label these up really is great. I mean, if you've built a few MIDI quads, you pretty much know what these are for, but if you're coming to it relatively new, then it's very useful to have the cables labelled up. And in this bag we've got a couple of battery straps. Oh, it's a battery strap and a camera strap. That's unusual actually. You normally, oh, you got 2. Excellent, 2 of each. Normally when you get sort of any of these sort of like ready to fly, bind and fly, plug and play type mini quads, you'll only get a battery strap or 2 battery straps, and you have to use the same one for the camera as you do for the LiPo. These are nice because they're actually a little bit wider. Do they fit? Oh no, that's the battery strap. That's the camera strap. Fat battery straps, interesting. Anyway, let's see what else we've got in here. I won't bore you with this too long. We've got some prop nuts. We've got some spare Allen bolts, which I think are for these down here by the looks of it. Yeah, they're the nice short ones. Some spare bolts for mounting the flight controller and the VTX by the looks of it. Not sure what they're for, but they're just sorry, they're spare nylon screws for the flight controller. We've got some more soft mounts, spare soft mounts, 4 spare soft mounts for the flight controller. More spare bolts, I presume they're for spare motor mounts. This is an anodized bracket. I'm not quite sure. How's that? That's strain relief for the XT60, the main power cables. How on earth is that going to get under there? I see what they're trying to do here. Yeah, so that's going to be quite difficult to get in there. I see what they're trying to do. It's quite a nice little machined part and anodized. But anyway, let's get on and have a look at the specs. So I've pretty much lost count of how many packs I've flown on my original GT2, but it's got to be several hundred. I take it with me wherever I go. It's the quad I have all the time because it's pretty much guaranteed to fly now. I've made some changes to my original. Well, I've actually had 2 of these, and there were some changes over time. So I know this inside out. There's not much I don't know about that. So what have Diatone actually changed? Well, this is the stretch version of the GT2 frame, which is supposed to be more suited to racing. They've changed the D-Link F3 flight controller, and it now uses the Fury F3, which we'll have a look at in a second, and they've upgraded the ESCs and the motors. I really liked the original D-Silver 2205 motors because they were very smooth and fairly powerful, to be honest. I even used them in another build with a full KISS setup, and they really are excellent for freestyle. They're a bit like the Lumineer motors. They're not the most powerful, but their power delivery is nice and smooth, and it's predictable, which is what you want for freestyle. These new SunnySky Edge motors have got the same similar silver winding wire, but these are now 2306 2450 kV, so it's going to be interesting to see how they fare against the originals. They've paired that with a new 302 XD 30 amp ESC, and it looks like a promising combination, to be honest. One thing it does improve on over the original GT2 is the Blheli bug that used to brick the ESCs if you upgraded to anything but to the original Betaflight 3.0. So hopefully that's all sorted now. I've covered that in many of my other videos. It's not really a problem, and there are ways around it. And when you think you've bricked your ESCs on the original GT2, there are ways to actually bring it back to life. It's complicated, but there are ways to do it. The FPV system uses the Diatone SP2 VTX and an HS1177 camera. That lens looks like a 2.8. I'm not exactly sure how this VTX is different from the SP3, which is on the original, but it still doesn't support smart audio. So you can't use a Lua script on your transmitter to change the channels and power settings remotely. You still have to use this stupid little button that's down here to change channels. It's got that sort of light short press, long press thing, which is incredibly fiddly and very annoying. One thing that is different is the transmit power settings. The SP3 on the original, the different settings were 0, 25 milliwatts, 200 milliwatts and 600 milliwatts, and this SP2 is now 0, which is like pit mode, 25 milliwatts, 200 milliwatts and 400 milliwatts. So at the top end it's not quite as powerful. The flight controller, which is this top board here, is soft mounted, as you can see, with these little blue soft mounts. I've seen some reviews which say that's new, and that's not true. This is a later generation original version which does have soft mounts. The first versions that came out weren't soft mounted at all. So this isn't actually new, this is carrying over from what was on the original. The frame is still 5mm carbon monobody, same deal, which is the same high quality, and it's finished unusually in what looks like clear coat, sort of thing that you might put over acrylic or cellulose paint. It means it's nice and easy to wipe clean. They've also taken away the engraving. You can't see it because I've got tape on here, but these were engraved underneath with Crusader. You can just see it on the edge maybe. A bit pointless, to be honest, because it will be a weak point in the frame, however marginal. And I ordered the stretch frame supposedly because it's grippier in the turns and more suited to racing, but we'll see how that goes. There is a true X version available, which is just like the original. Whether it's exactly the same size or not, I don't know, but we'll see. There's a few subtle changes and improvements in the machined aluminium parts. The GoPro mount now uses 4 screws to hold this in, but they're the same high quality parts. Look, yes, if you look here, you see these were just held in. This GoPro mount here was originally held in with these 2 screws at the side, and to stop it spinning there's just 2 holes in there. This new version uses the same mechanism, but instead of the little sort of like spigots on there, we've now got 4 bolts that hold that in place. One of the problems, which is a little bit difficult to see until we've got all the props on, I'll just put an antenna on to show you, but let's see if we can find some props here. So these are not the ones that come with it, but it'll show you the problem. Now this is great. It keeps a nice low profile, as you can see. This anodized part here holds the BNC in place. That will need strapping down, but the antenna is clear of the props. Great. But if you use a little stubby TBS or something like that, you can get problems. Well, in fact, unless you bend it up quite a bit, the props will hit the top of the antenna, and even the pagoda can be a bit of a problem. The trick I think that they've missed, which I've done on some of my builds, is although it seems nice and neat and looks great for the antenna to come up this way, one way to do this is actually to have the mount here pointing down. Because you've got your battery there, it's sort of inherently protected, and it's well out of the way of the props. So perhaps a trick that Diatone have missed. I don't know whether it's just me that's done that. I'm sure other people have done the same sort of thing. And the great new feature, as I touched on when I was opening the box, is these soft motor mounts that provide complete isolation of the motor and the motor bolts on the frame. And I've talked about this loads before, and I totally agree that fixing the problem at the source of the vibration, the motors, is the best way to fix vibrations that you get from the motor into the gyroscope in the flight controller. The problem with just simply soft mounting is the bolts are still in contact with the frame, and this mechanism, which I showed earlier on, is great. It's completely new. I think other manufacturers will start to copy this idea. Although this isn't a particularly, well, I don't know about this one yet, but this isn't a particularly noisy quad. I found when I put these this motor mount and soft motor mount and protection system on here, frame protection system on here, it got rid of those last little bits of vibration that I was struggling with on when I was dropping vertically out of power loops and things like that. And I noticed when I had a quick look through some of the instructions, Diatone even suggests that you can print up your own mounts with different hardnesses. So you may find third-party suppliers providing these as well. And this really nice battery mount that they have underneath. I haven't seen these before. These fat battery strap holders. This is great. This is sort of one of those subtle touches that other manufacturers should take note of. It means that you're not having to put your strap between the frame and whatever board you've got on the bottom of your stack. Just a nice way of doing it. Other manufacturers take note. There's some beautiful design features in here, which is excellent. And obviously it's slightly longer, as you can see. They've extended this to use the bolts that are holding these mounts for the whole top section. They've added these ESC protectors, and they look very nice, but I'm not convinced they actually contribute very much other than a bit of weight. I know it's popular these days to cut a old piece of prop and stick it on top and then wrap tape round, and that's to stop any problems of the prop coming down and slicing through or smashing into the top of your ESC. I've never had a problem with this. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough. Another trick that I've done, and I'm sure others have as well, is rather than mounting the ESCs on the top of these frames, when you've got an underslung battery, you can quite easily put them on the bottom. You have to arrange your cabling slightly differently, and you have to have a mechanism to bring the wires over the top here, or sort of round underneath. But that gets the ESCs completely out of the way of the props, so it's just an option. And I can see this again, the same as the original. Everything's wired up and ready to go. Why they don't actually fit the buzzer in for you, I've no idea. Seems a bit of a crazy thing. It can be a little bit difficult to route this and find somewhere to put it that's convenient, but we'll get that sorted out anyway. In terms of weight, let's have a quick look. The original wasn't the lightest, but it was still pretty good. This just feels a little bit heavier. So let's see what we've got on here. 332. Now there's no antenna on here, so it's a like for like almost. I've got a receiver in here, an X4R, and I've got these frame protectors and the soft mounts. They contribute about 12 grams. So yeah, maybe 320, but we'll call it 332, do a like for like. And let's see what we've got on here. Yeah, 348. So it is on the heavier side. The frame, although it's stretched, has about the same sort of area. I suspect these motor ESC covers rather are contributing to the weight a bit, and I don't know about the motors. They actually, it's interesting. Yeah, the actual bell of the motor is much smaller. There's a lot less material in here, so I suspect those motors are actually, if we weighed them individually, the D Silver motors would be a little bit heavier, but they are just so nicely made. I just need to get a receiver in here, get it all set up in Betaflight, and I'll cover that in detail in part 2. We'll just need to wait for some good weather to come in, and I'll get it out and see how it flies and show you some test footage. That'll be it. Lens was loose. So I thought I had really bad vibrations, but actually it's the lens on the HS1177 that come loose and it's flapping about. Overall, this new GT 2017 model is excellent, and it follows in the footsteps of the original. It's improved in most areas, and this stretch version is quicker and more suited to racing. It's a shame the SP2 VTX still has this silly little channel change switch, but that's the only real negative I can find at the moment. Time will tell though. The original had some reliability issues, particularly with electronics, that were mainly down to being a victim of its own success, and I don't think Diatone were able to keep a tight rein on quality control. So is this a beginner's quad? No, definitely not. For the same reasons I gave for the original, this is a very quick mini quad. Yes, it's very stable, but it's still too quick for a beginner. You'll crash it loads, and the spare situation, particularly in the UK, is still a problem. There's nothing more frustrating than not being able to fly because you're waiting for weeks for spares to turn up. But for the intermediate pilot and above, this is a spectacular ready to fly mini quad. It makes me wonder sometimes why I spent ages building my own quads from scratch. I hope you found that useful. In part 2 I'll show you a full setup and cover any changes and tweaks that I've made. And if you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. And I'll see you next time.